Tavern stood in the observation deck of the Galactic Council station, his forearms crossed behind his back, his scales a deep green that marked him as a decorated veteran of the Keth Empire. Caught the light from Proxima Centauri. Through the massive window he watched ships come and go, vessels from dozens of different species moving through the organized chaos of interstellar traffic. He had seen 30 years of military service, 30 years of protecting the border worlds from raiders and hostile forces. The border conflicts had been the bloodiest war in recent galactic history. 15 years of fighting, 200,000 souls lost. Tyvran carried the weight of every battle in his memories, in the scars hidden beneath his uniform. Now at 53 cycles old, he served the Council in a different way. No more battlefields, no more plasma fire and screaming and death. He was a cultural assessor now, diplomatic liaison. His job was to meet new species, learn their ways, and determine if they could join the greater galactic community in peace. Assessor Tavern. A voice broke through his thoughts. He turned. A human stood in the doorway. Humans were the newest species to achieve faster than light travel. Barely 3 years ago, this one was male, average height for their species, with black hair and a friendly smile. He wore a military uniform, neat and professional. "I am Tavern," he replied, his translator device converting his clicks and hisses into human language. "I'm Daywin, military historian. I'll be your primary contact during the voyage." The human extended his hand. Tavern had studied the gesture. He reached out with one of his upper arms and grasped the human's hand gently. The human's grip was firm, warm, so different from Kel Thorn greetings, which involved touching foreheads. "The new dawn departs in 2 hours, Day1 said. "Your quarters are ready. I've prepared all the materials you requested about human military history and culture." "Good," Tavern said. "I wish to understand your species before we reach the colony site." "Of course, that's why you're here." Daywin smiled again. Humans smiled so much it was unsettling at first, but Tavern had learned it was a sign of friendliness. "I think you'll find us interesting. We've had quite a journey as a species." They walked through the station corridors together. Daywin talked easily, pointing out features of the station, mentioning crew members they would meet. He spoke about the colony ship with pride. New Dawn would carry 15,000 humans to a new world in the Kepler system, a journey that would take 4 months. "This is our first independent colony," Daywin explained. "We've established settlements on Mars and Europa, but this is different. This is us truly joining the galaxy as a space-faring civilization." Tavern listened carefully. Humans seemed optimistic, almost childlike in their enthusiasm. Most species were more reserved when they first reached the stars. They carried the weight of knowing how vast and dangerous the universe could be. The New Dawn was impressive. Even Tavern, who had served on warships and carriers, felt a moment of appreciation. The colony's ship stretched nearly 2 km, its hull gleaming white and silver, gardens visible through transparent sections, rotating habitat rings for artificial gravity, engineering that rivaled some of the best in the galaxy. "We built her in orbit over Earth," Dayan said with obvious pride. "Took us 8 years. Every nation contributed. Your world is unified?" Tavern asked. "That was unusual. Most species reach the stars while still divided into competing nations. Mostly, Daewon said, we still have our disagreements, but we learned to work together. Had to really. His quarters were spacious and had been modified for Keelan needs. A wider bed for his larger frame, lower humidity. Workstations adjusted for someone with 4 arms. Humans were thoughtful hosts. I've loaded our complete historical database into your system, Daewon said, gesturing to the computer terminal. Military records, cultural archives. Everything. Feel free to ask if you have questions. I live 3 doors down. Thank you, Tavern said. After Daewon left, Tavern stood alone in his quarters. Through the window he watched the station slowly drift past as the new dawn prepared for departure. He felt the familiar flutter of nervousness before a new assignment. This was important work. The council needed to know if humans could be trusted as allies, as neighbors, in the great community of species. He settled at his workstation and activated the historical database. Where to begin? He decided to start at the beginning, with humanity's earliest recorded conflicts. Every species had tribal warfare in their past. It was natural competition for resources, territory survival. The Kelthorans had fought such wars 20,000 years ago. Before they unified, the first files appeared on his screen. Mesopotamia, Egypt, ancient human civilizations. Tavern began to read. At first it seemed normal. City-states fighting over farmland and water, bronze weapons, armies of hundreds or thousands. Tragic, but expected for a developing species. But as he read deeper, something began to trouble him. The wars never stopped. In Kelthoran history, there were long periods of peace between conflicts, centuries sometimes, but in human history the wars blended together, one after another. Different names, different nations, but constant fighting. He read about the Assyrian Empire, which built its power on systematic conquest and terror, about the Roman Empire, which enslaved millions, about the Mongol invasions, which killed tens of millions across continents. Tavern leaned back from his screen. His translator must be malfunctioning. Tens of millions in pre-industrial warfare. He checked the figures again. No error. The Mongol conquest alone killed an estimated 40 million humans with swords and arrows and fire. He felt a chill run through his body. The entire border conflicts, the bloodiest war in recent galactic history, had killed 200,000 beings over 15 years using advanced weapons, starships and plasma technology. These humans had killed 40 million of each other with primitive weapons, and that was just one series of wars. Tavern stood and walked to the window. Outside, human crew members floated past in space, suits performing final checks on the hull. They waved to each other. One was laughing at something, the sound coming through the comms. They seemed so normal, so peaceful. He returned to his terminal and continued reading. The Crusades, the 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War. The names blurred together. The numbers climbed higher. When the new dawn's engines thrummed to life, and the ship began its journey toward the stars, Tavern barely noticed. He was reading about the Aztec Empire, about ritual sacrifice and wars fought specifically to capture prisoners for those sacrifices, about the complete destruction of Carthage, where the Romans killed or enslaved every single person and burned the city to ashes. This was just ancient history. Humans had thousands more years of records to review for the first time since accepting this assignment. Taven felt something he had not felt since the worst days of the border conflicts. He felt afraid. 1 week into the voyage, Taven had stopped attending the communal meals. He told Daewon he needed time to adjust to the ship's environment, which was not entirely a lie. But the truth was darker. He could not sit at tables with humans and make pleasant conversation, while his mind filled with images from their history. He spent his days in his quarters methodically working through the database. He approached it like a military intelligence officer because that was what he had been. Take the data, analyze it, find patterns, draw conclusions. The patterns he found terrified him. Medieval Europe, Asia, Africa, the Americas, no matter which continent, which culture, the story was the same. War after war after war. Humans fought over religion, over land, over gold, over insults to honor. They developed ever more efficient ways to kill each other. The Kelthorans had legends of their own violent past, but it was so long ago that details were lost to time. For humans, everything was recorded. Every battle, every massacre, every atrocity. Taven read about the siege of Baghdad in 12th and Fuad, where Mongol forces killed hundreds of thousands of people in a single week. About the European wars of religion that devastated entire regions. About the slave trade that transported millions of Africans in chains across an ocean with countless dying in the journey. He tried to be objective. He reminded himself that his job was to assess, not to judge. Every species had darkness in their history. The Kelthorans had certainly committed acts they were not proud of, but the scale, the relentlessness, the sheer creativity humans applied to destruction. His thoughts were interrupted by proximity alert, combat training in the nearby gymnasium. Optional observation. For crew members, Taven decided to go. Perhaps seeing humans in a military context would help him understand them better, or perhaps it would confirm his growing fears. The gymnasium was large, with padded floors and various training equipment. About 30 humans in exercise clothing were practicing hand-to-hand combat techniques. An instructor called out moves and corrections. Keep your stance low, Young-Soo. Good, now. Counter-strike. Young-Soo was a young man, perhaps 25 in human years, fit and quick. With an easy smile, he sparred with another crew member there. Movements controlled and practiced. Taven watched from the observation area. The techniques were efficient, designed to disable an opponent quickly. But the humans practiced with obvious restraint, pulling their strikes, helping each other up after throws, laughing and joking between rounds. When the session ended, Young-Soo noticed Taven and approached, tolling sweat from his face. Assessor, good to see you. We haven't seen much of you this week. His smile was genuine. I have been studying, Taven said. Right, the historical stuff Daewon mentioned. You're really digging into it. Young-Soo took a drink from a water bottle. My great-grandfather was in a war, you know, the Korean War back in the 1950s. Family keeps his medals in a display case. The Korean War. Taven felt his stomach tighten. Yeah, on the peninsula, where my family's from, happened like 300 years ago, but we remember. He never talked much about it. According to my grandmother, I think it was pretty rough. Young-Soo said it so casually, the way one might mention an interesting Family story. Then he waved goodbye and headed to the showers. Tavan returned to his quarters immediately and searched for the Korean War in the database. The war lasted 3 years from 1950 to 1953. Estimated casualties, over 3 million. Dead, most of them civilians. The peninsula was devastated by bombardment, with entire cities reduced to rubble. 3 years, 3 million dead. Tavan sat very still. Young-Soo's ancestor had survived that, and Young-Soo smiled and joked and practiced fighting with careful restraint, completely normal seemingly. Untouched by the violence in his bloodline, he forced himself to continue reading. If the Korean War was in the 1950s, that meant it was part of the 20th century. He pulled up the broader context. What he found made his hands shake. World War I, 1914-1918. 17 million dead. World War II, 1939-1945. 70 to 85 million dead. Tavan stared at the numbers. They could not be real. His translator must be malfunctioning. He ran diagnostics. Everything was working perfectly. 70 to 85 million dead in 6 years. He pulled up details about World War II, and the horror deepened with every file he opened. Industrial killing on a scale he could not comprehend. Entire cities destroyed in single bombing raids. Factory systems designed to murder millions of civilians. The Holocaust, a systematic attempt to exterminate entire populations. Weapons that could level cities in an instant. Nuclear weapons. Humans had developed them and actually used them twice on cities full of civilians. His data pad slipped from his hands and clattered on the desk. Tavan stood and paced his quarters, all 4 arms moving in agitation. This was impossible. No species could survive this level of self-destruction. No species could inflict such horror upon itself and continue to function. The border conflicts had traumatized the Keluran people. 200,000 dead over 15 years, and it had taken generations to recover. Psychologically, monuments were built, days of remembrance established. The entire empire still bore the scars. Humans had lost 200,000 soldiers in single battles multiple times, and they kept fighting. For years, he thought of the humans he had met. Day 1 with his friendly smile, an easy conversation. Young-Soo laughing during combat practice. Crew members he passed in corridors who nodded politely and went about their duties. How could they function? How could they smile and laugh and live normal lives when their history was soaked in blood? Tavan accessed the ship's manifest and looked at crew statistics. 15,000 colonists. He filtered for military veterans. Over 3,000 had served in Earth's various military forces. 1 in 5 humans on this ship had trained for war. He filtered further. How many had actually seen combat? The database listed conflicts from the past 60 years, small wars, peacekeeping missions, anti-piracy operations. 400 crew members had combat experience. 400 trained killers living among families and children, and no one seemed concerned. A message appeared on his terminal from Daewon inviting him to dinner with some crew members tomorrow. Casual, friendly. We'd love to have you join us. Tavan deleted the message. He could not sit across from these creatures and make polite conversation. Not now. Not knowing what he knew, his own war trauma, carefully managed for years, began to resurface. Memories of battles, of friends dying, of the enemy soldiers he had killed, too. Personally, two beings whose lives he had ended in combat, and it haunted him. Still, how many had each human soldier killed? How did they sleep at night? He pulled up more files, unable to stop himself now. The Vietnam War, the Soviet Afghan War, the Gulf Wars, conflicts in Africa, in South America, in the Middle East, the wars never stopped, even after the two massive world wars humans kept fighting, and these were just the major conflicts. The database listed hundreds of smaller wars, revolutions, genocides, ethnic cleansings, taverns. Chronological review had only reached the mid-10th century. Humans had 75 more years of history to account for, and then the period after they achieved space flight. He did not want to know what came next, but he had to know. It was his duty. The ship's night cycle began, lights dimming automatically. Through his window, Tavern could see stars streaming past as the new dawn traveled faster than light. Somewhere on this ship, Yang-Su was probably sleeping peacefully, untroubled by the weight of history. Day one was likely preparing materials for tomorrow's cultural briefing. Families were putting children to bed, reading them stories, kissing them good night. Normal. Everything seemed so normal, but Tavern knew the truth now. These humans carried violence in their very DNA. It was not ancient history, it was continuous, unbroken, relentless, and the Council wanted to welcome them into the galactic community. He returned to his terminal and continued reading, knowing he would not sleep tonight. Week 3 began with a request from Tavern for isolation protocols. He told the ship's administration he needed uninterrupted time for deep cultural analysis. They approved without question, respecting his role as council assessor. In truth, Tavern was spiraling. He knew it on some level, but he could not stop. The database had become an obsession. Every time he thought he had found the worst of human history, he discovered something darker. He had moved into the 20th century's major conflicts, and what he found there defied his understanding of warfare entirely. World War I introduced him to trench warfare, millions of soldiers living in mud, subjected to artillery bombardment for months or years, poison gas that burned lungs and blinded eyes, battles that raged for months over kilometers of destroyed land, with hundreds of thousands dying for minimal territorial gain. The Battle of the S. First day, 19,000 British soldiers killed. By the end, over 1 million casualties on all sides. Tavern had to stand and pace. His quarters felt too small. 1 million casualties in a single battle. The Killthorns would have surrendered. Any rational species would have stopped, but the humans continued. For months, he read about World War I's Eastern Front. The siege of Leningrad lasted nearly 900 days. Over 1 million civilians died, many from starvation. The Battle of Stalingrad killed nearly 2 million soldiers and civilians. The entire war on that front cost over 20 million Soviet lives alone. The industrialization of death shocked him most. Assembly lines for weapons, factories running day and night to produce bombs and bullets, entire economies transformed into machines for warfare, and then the Holocaust. Tavern had to stop reading several times. Concentration camps, gas chambers, medical experiments, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, along with millions of others deemed undesirable. This was not war, this was extermination, genocide on an industrial scale. He thought he might be sick. Keelthers did not vomit, but he felt a physical revulsion that went to his core. A chime at his door, he ignored it. The chime came again. Assessor. Tavern, it's Hyan Wu, chief engineer. I'm worried about you, you've missed 3 meals. Tavern considered not answering, but Hyan Wu and LT Unk and GT's voice carried genuine concern. He opened the door. Hyan Wu stood there with a food container. He was older than most crew, perhaps 50 in human years, with gray in his hair and kind eyes behind glasses. I thought you might be hungry, Hyan Wu said simply. I am working. Tavern said, I understand, but you still need to eat. Yan Wu smiled gently. May I come in just for a moment? Tavern stepped aside. Hyan Wu entered and set the food on the desk, glancing at the screen still displaying information about World War II. Heavy reading. Hyan Wu observed. It is my assignment. It is, but maybe you need a break. Hyan Wu gestured to the food. My wife, Miss Sun, made this. She's a botanist, works in the hydroponics bay. She makes incredible food from the ship's gardens. Thank you, Tavern said stiffly. My family is having dinner in Recreation Area 3 tonight. Nothing formal, just us and a few friends. We'd love to have you join us. My daughter Bora has been asking about you. She's fascinated by Keelthorans. Tavern wanted to refuse, but Hun Wu and LT Unk and GT's kindness was disarming, and perhaps seeing humans in a normal setting would help him process what he was learning. I will consider it, he said. 6:00 our time. I hope you'll come. Hun Wu smiled again and left. Tavern ate the food. It was good, fresh vegetables, and something like bread. He returned to his reading, but Hyan Wu and LT Unk and GT's visit had broken his concentration. At 6:00 he found himself walking to Recreation Area 3. The area was set up like a small park, with real grass and trees grown in the ship's gardens. Hyan Wu sat on a blanket with his family. His wife Miss Sun was arranging food. Their daughter Bora, who looked about 10 years old, was playing with a small device that projected holographic images. Tavern. You came. Hyan Wu stood and waved him over. Bora looked up and her eyes went wide. Wow, forearms, that's so cool. Bora, manners, Misan said gently, but she smiled at Tavern. We're an LT Unk and GT, so glad you could join us. Please sit. Tavern sat awkwardly on the blanket. Bora immediately scooted closer, curiosity overcoming any shyness. What's your planet like? Do all Keelthers have 4 arms? Can you pick up 4 things at once? Bora, give him space, Hyan Wu said, laughing, but Tavern found himself answering her questions. She listened with complete fascination, asking follow-up questions that showed genuine interest. Misan served food and asked polite questions about Keloran culture. Wu talked about the ship systems with enthusiasm. They were so normal, so kind. Misan laughed at her husband's jokes. Bora showed Tavern her holographic art projects. Hun Wu shared stories about funny incidents in engineering. Tavern watched them and felt his mind fracturing. These gentle people, this loving family, they carried the same DNA as the humans who had built concentration camps, who had firebombed cities, who had enslaved millions. Are you okay? Misan asked softly. You seem troubled. I am fine, Tavern lied. Bora looked at him with her young, innocent eyes. My teacher said you're learning about Earth history. Do you want to know about my great-grandfather? He was in a war. Tavern's blood went cold. Was he? Yeah. The Vietnam War. He has medals and everything. Dad keeps them in a case at home, but we have pictures. She pulled up an image on her device, an old photograph of a young human in military uniform. He died before I was born, Bora continued, but Grandma said he was very brave. He saved his friends in a battle. That's enough, Bora, Hyen Wu said quietly. Assessor Tavern doesn't need to hear about wars, but Tavern was already accessing the Vietnam War in his memory. 19 years of conflict, over 3 million dead, most of them civilians, chemical weapons used to destroy forests and crops, villages burned, massacres, and this child spoke of it with pride. Her ancestor had been there, had participated in that horror, and she showed his picture with innocent admiration. I should go, Tavern said abruptly. Standing, did I say something wrong? Bora asked, her face falling. No, child. I am simply tired. He forced his voice to soften. Thank you for the meal. He left quickly, hearing Miss Sun comforting Bora behind him, back in his quarters. He sat in the dark for a long time. How could they not see it? How could they be so casually proud of military service when their military history was a river of blood? He pulled up more files. Latter half of the 20th century, the Cold War, where humans built enough nuclear weapons to destroy their entire planet many times over. Conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, the Rwanda genocide, the Yugoslav wars, on and on and on. The violence did not stop. It evolved, changed form, found new justifications, but it never stopped. Tavern accessed records from the 21st century, climate wars over water and resources, the Asian conflicts, the resource wars of the 2190s, the resource wars, those had ended only 37 years ago. Within living memory, 400 million dead. In 20 years of fighting over rare earth elements and habitable land, 400 million. By comparison, the border conflicts were a minor skirmish. Footnote: Tavern thought of Bora and LT Unk and GT. Innocent face of Miss Sun's kindness, of Hyen Wu and LT Unk and GT's gentle concern, of Dayan's friendly professionalism, of Yang Su and LT Unk and GT's easy smile. They were good people. He could see that, feel it, but they were also the descendants of the most violent species he had ever encountered, and violence like that did not disappear. It waited, it lingered in the blood, in the culture, in the very structure of their civilization. The Galactic Council needed to know, they needed to understand what they were inviting into their community. Tavern began composing his preliminary report. His hands shook as he wrote, "Humanity presents an unprecedented risk to galactic stability. Their history demonstrates a capacity for violence and systematic destruction far exceeding any known civilization. While individual humans may display positive qualities, their species has never known true peace. Warfare is not an aberration in human history. It is the constant. It is who they are." He paused, reading his own words. Was this fair? Was he being objective? He looked at the data, 10,000 years of recorded history, war in every century, on every continent, between every culture. The data did not lie. He continued writing his report, documenting the evidence building his case. By morning his recommendation would be clear: humanity should be quarantined, contained, kept away from the peaceful species of the galaxy for everyone's safety. 2 months into the voyage, Tavern requested a formal meeting with the ship's captain. His report was complete. 70 pages of documentation, analysis, and recommendations. The conclusion was clear and damning: humanity was too dangerous to join the galactic community. Captain Jinho agreed to meet in his ready room, a small office adjacent to the bridge. Tavern arrived with his data pad containing the full report, prepared to present his findings professionally and completely. Jinho was waiting, sitting behind a simple desk. He was in his 50s with gray hair and tired eyes. He gestured to a chair across from him. Assessor Tavern, thank you for your work these past weeks. I understand you have concerns. I have completed my assessment, Tava said. Formally, my recommendation to the Council will be that humanity should not be granted full membership status. Furthermore, I will suggest limited contact protocols and monitoring. He expected anger, defensiveness. Instead, Jinho simply nodded slowly. You've been reading our history extensively. Then I understand your concerns. Jinho leaned back in his chair. We are a violent species. I won't insult your intelligence by denying it. Tavern had not expected agreement. It threw off his prepared arguments. 10,000 years of continuous warfare, Tavern said. Multiple genocides, industrial scale killing, nuclear weapons used on civilian populations. The resource wars alone killed more beings than the entire border conflicts by a factor of 2,000. I know, Jinho said quietly. I was there. Tavern stopped. In the resource wars. For 8 years, I was a commander in the Pacific Theater. Jinho's eyes looked past Tavern, focused on something far away. I saw things I'll never forget. Did things I'll never forgive myself for. Then you understand why I cannot recommend your species for full integration. I do. Jinho stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. But I'd like to ask you something. Why are we here, Assessor? Why is this ship full of families heading to the stars to colonize, to escape? Jinho turned back to him. To escape what we were, what we did to each other and to our planet. Tavern felt his certainty waver slightly. The capacity remains. Violence is in your nature. Yes. Jinho sat on the edge of his desk, closer to Tavern. Now it is. I won't lie to you. Every human on this ship carries that capacity, but we also carry the memory of what that violence cost us. He pulled up an image on his desk display. A young man in military uniform, smiling. My son Jin. He died in the resource wars. He was 23. Jinho's voice remained steady, but pain flickered across his face. We were on opposite sides of a stupid, pointless war over lithium deposits. He died believing he was protecting his country. I survived believing I was doing the same. We were both wrong. Tavern looked at the image. The young man had his father's eyes. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Jinho closed the image. Do you know what the resource wars taught us, Assessor? Finally, after 10,000 years of killing each other, we learned. The wars became so terrible, so devastating that we had no choice but to see ourselves clearly. And what did you see? Monsters. Jinho said it simply. We saw monsters. 400 million dead. Ecosystems destroyed. Entire regions Poisoned cities turned to glass and, for what resources we could have, shared land we could have cooperated. On he walked back to the window. The wars ended 37 years ago, do you know? How? Not with a great victory, with exhaustion, with horror, with every nation looking at what we'd done and realizing we couldn't continue. We were killing ourselves, but you did not change your nature, Tavern argued. You still have military's weapons. This ship has armed security. We did not erase our capacity for violence. Jinho agreed. We learned to control it, to direct it appropriately, to choose when and how to use force. He turned back to Tava. You were a soldier, you understand this. Tavern's own military service felt heavy on his shoulders. The border conflicts were necessary. We defended our worlds, and we defend our ships, our colonies, our people, but we no longer fight each other. Earth has been at peace internally for 37 years. That's the longest period without major human on human warfare in our recorded history. 37 years is nothing. It's a start. Jinho returned to his chair. I know your report will be negative. I understand why, but I want you to consider something. Every species in the galaxy has violence in their past. The difference is we remember ours clearly. We document it, we teach it, not to glorify it, but to ensure we never forget the cost. Tavern thought of his own people's sanitized histories, where ancient wars were legends and recent conflicts were discussed in abstract terms of strategy and honor. The Cathorans did not like to dwell on unpleasant details. We carry our shame openly. Jinho continued. My daughter Bora Hyan Wu and LT Duncan GT's daughter, she asked about you, you know. She was upset that she might have offended you. Tavan remembered the child's innocent face. She did not offend me. She mentioned her great-great-grandfather's service in Vietnam. That war was a mistake. Tragedy, but we don't hide it. We teach our children about it so they understand the cost of war, even the wars fought with good intentions. A message appeared on Jinho's desk. He glanced at it and his expression changed. Assessor, I need to interrupt our conversation. There's an emergency. He touched his communicator. Bridge. Confirm the distress signal. A voice responded. Confirmed, Captain. Colony Outpost 774 is under attack. Raiders from the fringe, they're requesting immediate assistance. Tavern felt his combat instincts activate. How far? 6 hours at maximum speed, Jinho said. Already moving toward the bridge. 50,000 colonists, mostly families, the raiders, have already breached their defenses. They rushed to the bridge together. Command crew was already at stations. Faces tense but focused. Duan was. They're now in a military command role that Tavern had not seen before. Status. Jinho ordered 4 raider ships, heavy cruiser class. They've disabled the colony's defense platforms. Ground forces are landing now. Local security is outmatched. Daewon pulled up tactical displays. We're the only ship in range. We're a colony transport, someone said. We're not equipped for this. We have 300 trained Marines on board, Jinho said, and we're not leaving those people to die. Battle stations, get me our best combat personnel. We go in fast and we hit hard. Tavern watched the crew transform. The friendly, casual humans he'd known for 2 months became something else. Efficient, precise, focused. Assessor, Jinho said, turning to him. You have combat experience. We Could use your tactical knowledge. Will you help us? This was not Tavern's fight. These were not his people. His mission was to observe, not participate. He thought of 50,000 civilians under attack, of children hiding in fear. I will help, he said. The next 6 hours were a blur of preparation. Tavern found himself in the tactical planning room with Daewon, Young Soo, and other military personnel. They moved with practice coordination, discussing approach vectors, insertion points, extraction scenarios. Primary objective is civilian evacuation, Daewon said. Secondary is neutralizing the raider ground forces. We avoid collateral damage at all costs. Rules of engagement, Young Soo asked. Minimum necessary force. We're not executing them, we're stopping them. Daewon looked around the room. We do this clean, we do this right, just like training. Tavern had expected aggression, eagerness for battle. Instead, he saw careful planning and constant concern for civilian safety. The new dawn dropped out of faster than light travel at the colony system. The tactical display showed the situation. Raiders had taken control of the main settlement. Hostages were being held in the central plaza. They're using civilians as shields, Tavern observed. Then we go surgical, Jinho said. Multiple insertion teams, simultaneous strikes. We extract hostages first, engage raiders second. That puts our teams at extreme risk, Tavern said. Standard military doctrine would be to neutralize the threat first. We accept that risk, Jinho said firmly. We don't sacrifice civilians for tactical advantage. Not anymore. Never again. Tavern realized he was seeing something important. Human military doctrine had evolved not toward greater efficiency in killing, but toward greater protection of life. Move us into position, Jinho ordered. Launch all teams in May. Whatever gods are listening, keep those people safe. The insertion pods launched from the new dawn like seeds scattered by wind. Tavern was in pod 7 with Daewon, Yang Soo, and 8 other Marines. The descent was violent, the pod shaking as it burned through atmosphere. Through the viewport, Tavern saw the colony. Smoke rose from damaged buildings. Central Plaza was visible, packed with civilians surrounded by armed raiders. 30 seconds, Daewon announced calmly. Remember, hostages first, minimum force. We're here to protect, not to punish. The pod hit ground hard, the door blew open, and the team moved out in perfect formation. Tavern followed his own military training, taking over. The plaza was 200 m ahead. Plasma fire erupted from raider positions. The Marines took cover, returning fire with careful precision. Tavern noticed immediately that they were aiming to disable, not kill, targeting weapons, shooting to wound legs and arms. Team 3 West Side secure. Civilians evacuating. Team 5 Medical Bay clear. Wounded secured. Status reports came in rapid succession. Yang Soo moved ahead, using his armor shield to protect a group of civilians. Running from the plaza, a raider shot hit his shoulder and he staggered but kept moving, getting the civilians to safety before falling back. Young Soo is hit, Tavern reported. I'm fine, Young Soo said through gritted teeth. Armor took most of it, keep moving. Daewon led their team toward the eastern section of the plaza where the largest group of hostages was held. Raiders had them pressed against a building, using them as cover. Standard tactics would require heavy fire, accepting civilian casualties as unavoidable. Day One did not take that approach, non-lethal. Grenades flash and smoke. We go in, undercover and pull them out. It was risky, dangerous. The Raiders would have clear shots at the Marines while they were protecting civilians. Execute. Day One ordered, the grenades deployed. Smoke filled the plaza. Tavern moved with the team into the chaos. Civilians were screaming, disoriented. The Marines guided them quickly, using their own bodies as shields. A Raider appeared through the smoke, weapon raised. Tavern fired instinctively with his sidearm, hitting the Raider's weapon and arm. The Raider dropped wounded, but alive. More Raiders came. The fight became close and brutal, but even in the confusion, Tavern saw the Marines maintaining discipline. They disabled rather than killed. They pulled back when civilians were in the line of fire. They took wounds to protect non-combatants. Young Sue went down hard, protecting a group of children, taking a plasma bolt that would have hit a small girl. He rolled, keeping his armored body between the children and the shooters until other Marines could cover them. Get those kids out, he shouted, blood visible on his armor. The evacuation continued for 20 minutes that felt like hours. Gradually, the civilians were pulled clear. Medical teams from the New Dawn set up triage stations. The Raider forces, seeing their hostages escaping, began to retreat toward their ships. Let them go. Jinho's voice came over the communications. Our objective is rescue, not revenge. All teams focus on civilian evacuation. Some Raiders tried to fight their way out. The Marines stopped them, but even then, with deadly force authorized, they aimed to disable. Tavern watched a Raider with a severe leg wound being given medical attention by a human combat medic. Why are you helping me? The Raider asked in pain and confusion. Because you're wounded, the medic said simply. Working on the injury. We'll turn you over to authorities, but we're not going to let you die. The battle ended. 3 Raider ships escaped. One was disabled and boarded, its crew taken into custody. The civilian casualties were miraculously low. 47,000 people evacuated safely. 15 human Marines were wounded, 3 seriously. Tavern stood in the plaza watching the aftermath. Medical teams treated wounded regardless of whether they were civilian, Marine, or Raider. Engineering teams were already assessing damage to help with repairs. Families were reunited, crying and holding each other. Young Sue was being carried on a stretcher, his armor scorched and broken, but he was smiling weakly at the little girl he had saved, who was holding his hand and crying. You're a hero, she said in the common language. Just doing my job, kid. Young Sue replied. Day One approached Tavern, his face streaked with sweat and smoke. Assessor, are you injured? I am unharmed. Good. Day One looked out at the plaza. This is who we are now. This is what we chose to become. Tavern understood. Then the violence was still there. The capacity remained, but it had been transformed, controlled, directed only toward protection, never toward domination or destruction. In all your history, after all that bloodshed, why? Tavern asked. Why did you choose mercy? Day One was quiet for a moment. Because we learned. Every war taught us the cost we paid in oceans of blood to understand one truth. Mercy is not weakness. It's the only thing that ends the cycle. He gestured to the scene around them. We could have killed every Raider here, could have used overwhelming force, But what would that teach us? What would it teach our children? Violence only creates more violence, so we break the cycle every time, even when it's harder, even when it costs us. Miss Ann appeared wearing a medical volunteer uniform. She was helping organize civilian care, moving from person to person with calm efficiency. She saw Tavern and smiled tiredly before continuing her work. Yan Wu was with an engineering team assessing damaged infrastructure. Bora was in an evacuation shuttle with her mother, probably scared but safe. Normal people doing extraordinary things, choosing to protect rather than destroy, risking themselves rather than accepting collateral damage. Tavern thought of his report sitting complete in his quarters, 70 pages explaining why humanity was too dangerous, too violent, too risky. He had been wrong not about the violence that was real. The history was accurate. Humans had committed atrocities that would shame any species. But he had missed the most important part. They had learned, they had changed, not by erasing their capacity for violence, but by mastering it, by choosing differently. The Kellorans had simply stopped fighting after the border conflicts because they were exhausted and traumatized. They avoided war because it hurt too much. Humans had fought wars that dwarfed the border conflicts hundreds of times over, and they had not just stopped, they had transformed. They had built protocols, ethics, training, focused on protection rather than destruction. They carried the capacity for terrible war but chose peace. That choice made, despite their nature, despite how easy violence would be, was what made them extraordinary. Back on the New Dawn, Tavern sat in his quarters and opened his report. He read through it once more. Every word was factually accurate. Every conclusion was logically sound, based on the evidence he had reviewed, and yet it was completely wrong. He deleted it. Starting fresh, he began writing a new report. This one would be honest about human history, about the violence and the bloodshed, but it would also include what he had learned today, what he had seen with his own eyes. Humanity should be welcomed into the galactic community, not despite their violent past, but because they overcame it. They are what we all hope to become, a warrior species that chose to be peacemakers. He wrote for hours, documenting everything, the battles and the mercy, the capacity for violence and the choice for peace, the history and the hope. A chime at his door. He opened it to find Bora standing there holding a piece of paper. Miss Sun stood behind her, giving her daughter an encouraging nod. I made you something, Bora said shyly, to say thank you for helping save us. She held out the paper. It was a drawing done in crayon. It showed Tavor standing with her family, all of them smiling. At the top, in a child's handwriting, my new friend. Tavern took the drawing carefully with one of his hands. Something in his chest felt tight. Thank you, Bora. I will keep this. Mom says you're deciding if humans are good enough for the galaxy, Bora said with a child's bluntness. I think we are. We make mistakes, but we try to be good. Isn't that what matters? Out of the mouths of children, Tavern thought. He looked at Missoon, who smiled gently. She is wise, Tavern said. After they left, he mounted the drawing on his wall where he could see it while he worked. A simple crayon picture drawn by a child whose great-grandfather had fought in Vietnam, whose mother had risked herself to help wounded strangers whose species carried 10,000 years of violence in their DNA. And yet they chose kindness. Tavern completed his report as the new dawn continued its journey to the stars. His recommendation was clear and firm. Welcome humanity, learn from them. Because they had walked through fire and emerged not as monsters, but as beings who understood the true cost of violence, who remembered the darkness and chose the light anyway, in a galaxy that had forgotten the lessons of war. Humanity remembered, they carried their shame openly, taught it to their children, and used it to forge a better path forward. They were exactly what the galaxy needed. Tavern looked out at the stars, feeling at peace for the first time since the border conflicts had ended. His own trauma felt lighter. Somehow, witnessing how humans carried theirs, perhaps healing was not about forgetting, perhaps it was about remembering well, learning deeply, and choosing differently. The humans had learned that lesson at terrible cost. Now they could teach it to the galaxy, and Tavern would be there to help them.